Imagine walking through a forest so silent you can only hear your own footsteps. Then, you hear a voice. It calls your name. Not just any voice. It's exactly your mother's voice. Or your father's. Maybe your brother's. You look around. There's no one there. Even so, the voice insists. Closer. More desperate. For centuries, families living in the Appalachian Mountains taught their children a simple rule. If someone calls your name in the forest, you don't answer. But why? Was it just a way to keep children from getting lost? Or was there something more concrete behind the warning? Today we're going to look at one of the strangest rules in American folklore and the reason why, centuries later, science ended up agreeing with it. Long before highways cut through those mountains, the region was made up of small, isolated communities. The forests were vast, dense, ancient. It was easy to disappear in them. No GPS, no cell phones, no maps. The forest could kill. But the locals said it wasn't just the cold or the animals. They believed something in there had a specific trick. It didn't roar. It didn't chase. It called you by name. The story goes that a boy named Thomas went out one afternoon to gather firewood. The sun was still high. Everything seemed normal. Until he heard his mother. "Thomas?" He smiled. He thought she'd followed him out. "Thomas, come here." The voice came from among the trees. He walked a few steps, then a few more, until he noticed something strange. The more he walked, the farther away the voice seemed to get. Even so, it kept calling, always in his mother's exact tone. That's when he remembered his grandfather's warning, never follow a voice in the forest. Thomas turned around and ran. When he got home, his mother had never left the house. Stories like this spread across generations in the Appalachians, always following the same pattern. Someone hears the voice of a loved one, never a stranger, always someone the victim trusted blindly. It was as if the forest knew exactly which voice to use to convince each person. For a long time, this was treated as nothing more than backwoods superstition. But when scientists began studying forest acoustics and animal behavior in the region, they found three real explanations that, together, line up almost perfectly with the legend. The first has to do with the sound of the mountain itself. In dense forest and uneven terrain, sound doesn't travel in a straight line. It bounces off trunks, cliffs, and valleys, a phenomenon physicists call multipath propagation. This means the same sound reaches your ears multiple times, coming from different angles, with fractions of a second of delay between each echo. The human brain locates a sound source by comparing the time difference between the left and right ear. Normally, a difference of just a few milliseconds is enough to know where something came from. But when sound echoes from multiple directions at once, that system simply fails. Acoustic studies in mountainous terrain show that the localization error for a sound source can exceed 30 degrees. In other words, you could swear a voice came from your right when it actually came from behind you or from nowhere near you at all. This explains why Thomas kept walking toward the voice, and it seemed to move away. He was never actually getting closer to anything, just chasing an echo his brain was interpreting as a direction. The second explanation is even more concrete and involves a real animal that lives in exactly these mountains. There's a mammal from the weasel family, common in the Appalachians, whose scream is almost indistinguishable from a human scream. Locals in the region have reported for decades hearing what sounds like a woman screaming in pain in the middle of the woods, to the point of generating real emergency calls, seeking help for no one. Biologists who study bioacoustics confirm that certain vocal frequencies of medium-sized mammals fall exactly in the range the human ear associates with distress, between 1 and 4 kilohertz, the same range as human crying and screaming. And that's not an evolutionary coincidence. Screams in that frequency range travel farther through dense woodland, so different species, over millions of years, converged on the same type of sound because it was what worked best there. So your ear wouldn't be fooled by weakness. Nature, without meaning to, created an almost perfect sonic clone of human crying, and it lives exactly in the mountains where this legend was born. But there's still the most unsettling part of the story to explain: why the voice is always someone you know and never a stranger. This is where a phenomenon called auditory pareidolia comes, in the same reason you think you hear your name in the sound of a running shower or in a fan humming at night. The human brain is trained from infancy to detect familiar voices within any ambiguous noise because that used to be a matter of survival. Recognizing your mother calling out amid chaos could mean the difference between safety and danger. The problem is that this system doesn't verify, it only suggests. It takes any imprecise sound wind passing through branches, the distorted echo of an animal, the crackle of dry leaves, and fills in the gap with the voice your brain most expects to hear. In a silent forest, at night, with no other competing stimulus, that tendency gets even stronger. In other words, the forest never knew your name. It was your own brain that decided to hear exactly the person who would make you drop your guard. Some historians believe this legend served a practical purpose from the start, teaching children never to wander off alone. In such dense forest, even a small distraction could mean disappearing forever. Turning that real risk into an invisible creature with a simple, memorable rule may have been the most effective way to protect an entire community, generation after generation, without having to explain acoustics or biology to anyone. But that doesn't explain everything, because many grown adults, experienced in the woods, also reported hearing these voices. People who knew every trail, every normal sound of the forest, and still swore they clearly heard someone they loved calling for them where no one was there. Almost every version of the story ends the same way. Whoever answers the voice never finds anyone. Whoever follows the voice ends up completely lost. Whoever ignores it always makes it back home. Coincidence? Maybe. Or maybe that's exactly why the story survived for so many generations. Because, in practice, ignoring the voice was always the safest choice, even without anyone fully understanding why. Today, few people literally believe in a creature that mimics voices in the forest. But the warning is still alive, even in modern Appalachian families, repeated, almost like a reflex. If someone calls your name in the middle of the woods, stop, look around, and think twice before answering. Because now we know that sound can trick your sense of direction, that there are animals whose screams almost perfectly mimic a human cry, and that the brain itself, alone, in the dark, will always prefer to believe it's someone you love calling out for you. Grandma's Rule or Forest Acoustics article, the final message is the same. In the forest, at night, alone, don't fully trust what you're sure you heard. And now I want to know, what was the story your grandparents used to tell to keep kids away from danger?